Hi everybody, it's MA. It is a rainy Saturday morning here in New York, and I just finally got around to watching Grace's tag about 13 real tarot questions and a bunch of the VRs, and man, what a breath of fresh air. It was like it was like a squeeze of lemon, not in a like sour way, but in that like refreshing, like, or when you're at work and someone peels an orange and you can smell it across the room and you're like, oh yes. So yeah, I've been loving it, loving watching everybody's responses. I started making notes, and I realized this video is going to be too long, so I'm just going to record now and then finish watching everybody's. Yeah, love it. So I'm going to dive in. Giselle, Mad Witch, also mentioned at the beginning of her VR, just to kind of give you a little bit of background. I'm an older person, but I've only been working with tarot, with any depth for the last about 4 years. I've had a deck longer than that, but I wasn't really connecting or figuring things out. So yeah, I'm one of these people that during lockdown, I really dove into tarot. So my experience is more, not as much as some. So yeah, great. Okay, question number 1. What is tarot? So what it has been for me, the word I really come up with is portal or catalyst. For me, it is a way to keep what Aldous Huxley would call the doors of perception open, to refresh my consciousness and my ways of thinking. So it really acts as a guide, maybe like a guide that's up ahead on the path from me and is going, come on, come on, come on. Or a life coach. It's a partner. It's a friend. It's not a therapist. I have had that work and go back to that work when I need to. But in the interim periods when I feel like I've kind of, solved something enough to work on my own, and that's the space I've been in the last few years, this has been like just a wonderful tool. So yeah, a portal. Number 2, do I read for myself or for others? Mostly myself. I do occasionally read for others, mostly friends or acquaintances, mainly for other people. I'll try to stick to readings that are focused on creative process and especially writing. But once in a while, I'll act as a little bit of a tarot ambassador if someone's never had a reading before or is curious about tarot. I'll do pull a couple of cards for them or something like that. And I did go to the Omega in Rhinebeck, New York last summer, where we did practice reading on each other more. And I had some really nice experiences that I really felt lit up by reading for basically strangers. But I'm not sure if I'm prepared to handle that or manage that in my life right now. I don't ever intend to do it professionally, as in for payment. So that's where we are right now, mostly for me. With what frequency do I read? I am definitely a daily reader person in different varieties of ways. This will kind of fall into a few other questions, but in the morning, I generally use a guided question, and I'll pull 3 cards, not in a position spread, but in an open reading, and journal about that. I separately will do a card a day pull and occasionally other spreads. So definitely daily and sometimes more than once a day. But the readings are all different types. Okay, I'm going to turn some cards over while I blab. Okay, what types of reading do I do? For myself, the types of readings I've been doing for the last couple of years are mainly self-exploration, self-worth, and self-love stuff. Some definitely readings around coping with difficulty, either, personal, interpersonal things, job stuff, when that starts to get to me. So kind of the usual stuff. A lot of the readings I do, I use tarot a lot in connection with my writing practice. I'm a poet, and I don't really use tarot that much to generate work, but once I have first drafts of things, I will use tarot especially in the revising stage, where I need to explore, I've gotten something down on the page. It's not at its best form yet. And I may be looking at things like, what is missing from this piece of writing? Or what's at the core of it? How can I make changes that will help this work progress? Or even what's the real underlying message that I'm trying to express here? What am I really trying to express? Where's that coming from? How can I push it? So I definitely, when I said I read for others with creative process, I do that for myself a lot. And sometimes when I have a manuscript or a partial manuscript, I may pull cards about about putting things in a certain order. I may look at tarot archetypes in terms of progression, or I may lay out the majors and see what happens. If that really helps me mess with chronological order, which can be actually kind of chronological order can be a little bit dull in a poetry manuscript. And sorry, I'm getting a little too specific here. But shuffling around the majors kind of can be a great tool to play with that, among many other things. So those are the mostly kind of readings I do. Regarding what types of things do I consult tarot? Well, let's see. Do I consult tarot? So I think the funny thing is that tarot has actually made me more comfortable with questions. And I can't tell you how many times I do a reading and what I end up with is more questions. So I'm not sure what to do about that, but I actually kind of like it. I've been doing, regarding what types of things, we'll get to this in a little more detail or a little less detail, but I've been using tarot. So Sylvain was doing the Wizard of Oz project, where we were reading a chapter at a time, and then he would give a question that we would pull tarot cards for. And that's been put on pause. And I started going through this Pema Chodron book, Comfortable with Uncertainty. The chapters are 1 or 2 pages each. And I've been slowly working my way through the 108 mini chapters here and reading each little section and then forming it into a question that I'm pulling a tarot card to kind of guide me through how to put that into action in my life. So that's kind of a next level thing of what I'm starting to use tarot more for. Also, I was at a poetry reading by Cynthia Manick, and someone asked where her ideas for poems come from, and she talked about that they come from questions and how she's always asking questions about the world. So that's kind of a little practice I've started for myself, is that if I'm out in an environment, I'll try to write down a bunch of questions about the environment, and then I might use tarot to try to answer them and form them into a piece of writing. So for example, I was at a lake with some friends and they were going for a hike, and I had to not go as far because of an injury. And I just filled like a page of my notebook with questions about the environment. Some of them were factual, like how can geese tell each other apart? I don't know if tarot will answer that for me. There were some large rocks. Where was this stone before the glacier dropped it here? Does it miss the cold? Did it enjoy the ride? Where do waves come from in a lake? Does a lake obey the moon's commands on its edges? So questions. I think tarot has helped me ask questions and not feel like I need to know things, and being comfortable with mystery. So that's the type of things tarot and I talk about all the time. Okay, number 6. How would I classify myself as a reader? So I was just watching Mistress Ray's video, and a similar thing was mentioned. Like at the beginning, I was very into study and reading the books, and it wasn't really about memorizing the cards, but I really wanted to understand the connection between the images and the meaning. And I did spend a lot of time like pulling one card a day from various decks and like writing about it and reading the books. So I do love that. I think I've relaxed a bit over time. And I think what I feel now is that I have an underlying foundation that's freed me up. And I can only make that analogy to people that play jazz usually have spent a lot of time like learning scales and chord progressions. And when I say learning, I don't mean memorizing, but I mean like physically repeating them. And that's what allows for the freedom of improvisation. And I think that's where I'm headed toward. So I do look more now at the story that's happening between the cards. And the associative leaps between the images or between, between the various cards. Yeah. So that's where I am right now. I'm kind of in a transitional mode of relaxing the knowing and going further into the mystery and the association. Whatever that classification is, I don't really know. Okay. So this is number 7. What types of questions do I ask? I started going through that a little bit, but it's definitely evolving. And I think the reason is I've done a lot of work over the last couple of years and ended up kind of excavating some childhood trauma. And I don't say that, I don't mean excavating it as a victim. I've probably mentioned on an earlier video, I think, in first grade, 6 years old. I had an anaphylaxis reaction to penicillin, which was kind of, from a child's perspective, a near-death type experience. And I think until pretty recently, I did not allow myself to understand or see that that was trauma, and not in a capacity to have to say I've had trauma, but in a way to see how not acknowledging that and healing from it, and not seeing how it had shaped a lot of my behaviors in my life. So that's what my last couple of years work has really been. And I feel like I'm moving past that a little bit now and getting into these more spiritual questions. I mentioned I'm working through that Pema Chodron book. And some of the questions I'm working through in my writing are, okay, this is getting kind of deep and maybe TMI, but that childhood near-death experience to me, I was being raised Catholic at the time, that experience to me kind of cemented an early sense of being atheist. And I don't mean in a way that like, oh, God has forsaken me because I was ill. No, just like a shift in perception and acceptance and peace with the nothingness that was possibly there. And I've always found that a little strange. And again, excavating that and the things I'm exploring in my writing lately, or attempting to, because I think they're impossible. What does devotion look like from an atheist perspective or without deity? What does prayer look like without deity? And I don't know that these are answerable questions. So I think that's why I'm happy to have tarot that helps me to be uncertain. And yeah, it's just a really interesting shift for me right now. I'm going to be participating in what's called a retreat in real life that Carolyn Cushman at Soul Path Sanctuary does a few times a year. So I'm starting that next week, and that will be something private. I will not be sharing anything about it or telling anybody, but it's kind of, it definitely involves tarot. And then there's a quest involved. So it's definitely something I would not have found possible without this tarot work. So that's how things are kind of shifting for me. What questions do I never ask? I tend not to ask yes or no questions. That's just a thing for me. There's nothing wrong with it. I just tend not to. I don't tend to ask health or third-party questions or anything that feels icky. I think that's my barometer. If it feels icky, I'm just not going to do it. And sometimes that means I don't want to know the answer, or I'm afraid to look because what if I get the card that I'm dreading? For example, I'm not going to do current events or news items related reading, like who's going to win an election. I generally am not going to do something like a missing person reading. I had a lot of feelings about that for a while, about other people doing them. I kind of spent a minute thinking about why that would make me uneasy and realized it's none of my business. I think there are people I've seen that I know and respect who do it, and I honor their intention. I think there may be some people who do it for shady reasons, and that's a whole different situation. But yeah, anything that feels icky, I'm just not going to do it. And certainly if it's another person and they ask me a question I'm not comfortable with, I know someone else said this and I don't remember who, but I will redirect and see if they would be okay making that a question about them and their relationship to wanting to know that. And if they say no, then we're just not going to have a reading. We're just not going to do it. Yeah, so that's that one. That was question number 8. Okay. Question number 9, who do I think I'm engaging with when I use tarot? Okay. Yeah, this kind of gets complicated maybe. And I do another place where I have to stay with the mystery a little bit. So I think that really what's happening for me, or what I think is happening for me, is that I'm engaging with myself, but not the ego I, not the ego me, but some kind of subconscious, assemblage of collected images and ideas that the mind accumulates. And I don't personally, for me, that's no less of a miracle or a mystery than if I thought it was another being or ancestors or any of these things. Just because, like, we are a mystery. The way the mind works is a mystery. It's miraculous. And I personally don't need to know or consider whether that was made or created or governed by any other beings. Is just, it's something I don't even, it doesn't lessen it for me personally, but that's my situation. That's my belief system. I think what I'm engaging with is a shift of consciousness. I think there may possibly be such a thing as cellular memory. I don't know how that works, but it's observable possibly especially in animals like migratory birds and stuff. So there may be a science behind that. There may be a mystery behind it. I don't really care which one it is. When I might do, occasionally I will do what I would call an ancestral reading, but I don't believe that person is coming to me from the beyond. I believe that I am, and I don't phrase the questions that way. I might ask something like, what would my father want me to know about something today? Or what would my father think about this? And when I phrase things that way, sometimes I will get a response, and it will trigger a memory that I will understand why I thought they might have that opinion. So I don't know. Is that vague? I don't know. But that's kind of how it works for me. Yeah, and I am interested in cellular memory, but I don't really want to delve into it because, and if I did delve into it, I would probably do it on on what science is available about that. Because there's some territories of new agey stuff that I find kind of unappetizing to me, and I don't really want to get into that. So I'm just going to let the mystery sit there. Okay. Number 10, what other knowledge and experiences do I apply to tarot? Today, I don't think I mentioned anything specific about tarot books, but I am a rather bookish person. So I do bring, I think, when I talk about who am I engaging with, I've collected a lot of, I don't want to call it knowledge or information, but I've collected a lot of, I've read a ton of books in a million different genres. I've got a catalog of images. I'm bringing a lot of literary stuff with me. A lot of like general history stuff that I'm interested, I think, comes with me. I think from my personal experience, the overlap between poetry and tarot, I think, to me, from the way I read and the way I write is really important. In poetry, one thing that really attracts me is when there's associative leaps. And I think that's what happens in tarot for me is you end up with things that go together or don't go together. And like you have to read between the lines. And yeah, so I think that comes with me and twines those genres together. Also, I have a background as a classical musician, and I think there's something about nonverbal communication that's intriguing to me, and I haven't figured it out, but I know it impacts how I read tarot when I see the images all together and how I can see them as a musical score, like different lines of, I don't know, different lines of music that go together. And the same thing honestly happens to me at work because I read legal contracts, and the way that I see them sometimes is spatial, and then I go back into the actual meaning of the words. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I think that background impacts how I look at tarot cards. And I think too, and this goes back to another question, but because the overlap with poetry and tarot, I think there's this concept of metaphor that works really well. I mean, you know, or symbolism, right? Metaphor and symbolism, that's always active in my brain now. It's something that's almost always switched on. So I think that helps me with tarot reading, and then that helps me with writing also. And I think going back to what I said about that early childhood death experience and what kind of questions I ask, and I think that my feeling about the power of metaphor is why I'm so comfortable using or labeling myself as an atheist, because I feel that metaphor is so powerful that the association becomes alive, whether or not it's real. I don't know if that makes any sense. That's something I'm trying to work through. But anyway, I think that's something that impacts my reading, and I don't know that I would call that a knowledge, but it's just kind of where my brain is living right now. Okay. Tarot is Book of Life, number 11. Where else in the world do I see or experience tarot? Definitely like in human interactions. I can try to say, oh, that was like if these two cards were together, or tableaus in nature, or when I'm out in the world. Mistress Ray was mentioning cemeteries, and there's a cemetery near me that I'm in all the time. It's a beautiful place, for one thing, and sometimes I'll find stones that are next to each other, and there's a few where we've with a friend of mine, we go and I've brought her to a pair of stones and said, this is what I think is going on here. And I'll build a story between the people that are buried there. I don't know. So I'm kind of reading some of the gravestones as tarot cards. I don't know. That's kind of weird. And here's like one of the funniest places, and one of the places it brings me most delight to see tarot is when I'm watching TV or watching a movie or something, and start to see the archetypes, or that like maybe there'll be a doorway or someone holding two staffs or something, and it kind of opens up like this tarot moment. So that's always really fun for me. I mentioned before, my daughter and I were kind of playing around with having screenshots from The Office, the American version, that we were captioning with tarot card titles. And then there was a mass market deck that came out, and we had also decided in the interim, or I had, it's way more engaging for me to take tarot with me to my viewing than it is to take that experience and commoditize it into a deck. So yeah, so that's something I really have a lot of fun with. Which takes us to question 12. Have I experienced tarot predicting the future? Well, I'm going to first say mostly not. And then contradict myself. So mostly not, although what I have been doing this year is I draw a daily card, I take note of it, and at the end of the day, I've been visiting how it showed up for me. So in that way, I'm kind of building more personal associations and experiential associations with the cards. But I don't really do predictive readings. However, the exception to that, and how I'm thinking about this is interesting because it was unexpected. When I am watching TV, I may sometimes pull cards. And the one time, and I think what's happening is everybody's fictional. There's no stakes, right? And I'm just playing around. I'm paying attention to 2 or 3 things at once. And one of the funniest ones, that I wrote it down because I couldn't even believe it. I was watching like some kind of murder procedural. It might have been The Mentalist. And I got to the end. I was pulling cards along the way. What's going to happen? What's going on with this character? And the episode was ending, and I said, okay, let's really go in for it now. What's going to happen in the next episode? And I put 3 cards down, and I immediately just said, this one's going to open with a hit and run. Someone's going to get run over, and that's going to start the episode. That next episode starts. Sure enough, someone gets mowed down within the first 90 seconds of the show. So, coincidence? I don't know. But I think part of it was my brain was very open because I had nothing to worry about, right? All I could be was wrong. No one was going to get hurt. No one was going to cry. If it didn't come true, then it didn't come true, So I thought that was kind of funny. Yeah, so that's it. Other than that, that's pretty much it. And one other one, I was watching the documentary about the robbery of the Isabel Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston that happened, whenever that happened, 20, 30 years ago. And if they ever catch the people, what tarot told me, one of the things they stole, I think, they talk a lot about the paintings that were taken right out of the frames, and the frames are still on the wall. But there was something they stole that was like a gilded eagle that I think was a flagpole finial. And tarot told me that if they ever find the people that committed the robbery, it's going to be because they found that finial is hiding in plain sight. It's either in someone's office on the top of a flagpole or outside a building, but that finial is on display. And that's the clue. So there you go. Case closed. Okay. Number 13. Do I use tarot in magical practice? Yes. And mainly as a talisman or an altar card. And the way that might work is if I do a reading for myself that I find particularly meaningful or important, or a card comes up in a certain position that I know I need to pay attention to, I may go to a specific other deck and pull that card out and leave it on the altar, or use it for meditation for a period of time. Also, in connection with the writing, that is so much a bit of my magical practice that when I use cards for that, I consider that's an act of magic as well. And I, when I say that I use them in writing, and I had described some of the ways I might, that's something I may create a magical space or use them on the altar for that as well. Yeah, so that's that. I love this tag. I realize I rambled. And I'm going to go watch some more VRs right now. Thank you, Mary Grace, for starting this. Bye.